Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle and thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com. Join us also at Sonic Cinema Patreon at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. There you'll find commentary on my musical work and just the things that have inspired me. You'll also get access to exclusive early movie reviews, usually for older reviews. The most recent of which was Alan J. Pakula's All the President's Men. You'll get access to those before they come up on Sonic Cinema. You'll also see videos with regards to specific film commentary, as well as looking ahead at the book that I'm looking to release, and that is patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. I'm pleased to be joined today by a fellow composer, actually, and a film composer. His brother did an interview for the podcast last week, and I'm actually going to be releasing both of these on the same time. And they're part of Albino Fawn Films, and they've worked on Apocalypsis, The Glitch in the Grid, and Imagination. And please join me in welcoming Jeffrey Leiser to the podcast. I'm pleased to be joined today by a composer for several films, as well as some individual albums, I believe. His brother actually is on the podcast as well, and they are together. They make up Albino Fawn Films, and their work includes Imagination, The Glitch in the Grid, and most recently, Apocalypsis. And I'm pleased to be joined today by Jeffrey Leiser. Jeffrey, thank you for joining me today.
It's great to talk to you.
So, as a composer myself, I was really interested in doing this interview when Eric brought up last week, and I just what inspired you to get into music?
I didn't know I had any sort of musical ability until I was around 12, which is still pretty young, but a little older than some kids who just kind of start taking lessons really early. I suppose it really can be connected to TV and film, because there was one time where a song for a TV show was playing. It was like Doogie Howser, and for some reason I walked over to my mom's piano, because my mom plays piano, although I didn't have an interest at that point, and I was able to articulate the entire theme in the correct key off the top of my head. And then my brother ran in, my brother Eric, the filmmaker, and he was like, "Jeff can play," out of nowhere. He encouraged me a lot from there to start exploring that aspect. My mom as well, but I think my brother was instrumental in making me believe that I had an ability in music. He was already interested in art, but for me, it was sort of a toss-up. I mean, I didn't know whether to get a bass guitar or a piano or keyboard when I eventually got my first electronic keyboard when I was around 15, and I chose the keyboard. It was a toss-up, but then I really fell in love with it around the beginning of high school, and I started composing music almost every night just to play it for my brother. And I would have like this blue light, and it would be like dark and atmospheric, and I just started getting in that mood, and that's how it all began. Really, was that kind of strange realization that I had almost perfect pitch. I don't claim to have 100% perfect pitch, but I'm pretty good at calling keys out and intervals and things like that.
Well, what was it that inspired you to go into composing?
Composing, you mean for film or just for personal?
Just in general.
Yeah, I always. It's funny how it began with the theme show song, because I quickly went I'm self-taught. My mom did give me basic lessons in theory, but I very quickly just started making up songs from the song she was trying to teach me, and it got to be probably frustrating for her, but also liberating for me, where I just wanted to create my own themes, and I always had melodies in my head. So the more I explored that, the more melodies just came out. And I think that's the first step of being a composer, is coming up with melodies. The harmonic structure, I think, comes with age and experience.
Yeah.
But just having ideas off the top of my head, even if they were just very simple, inspired me. So I'd say in and of itself, it wasn't actually tied to specific composers. There were, along the way, I heard things that were inspiring to me and that were in the film music realm, feature film scores, things like that we could talk about. But as far as the influence itself, for me, it's a very personal experience. It was a way to get emotions out, especially from high school, those difficult times you're trying to figure out who you are. And for me, it was tapping into that, not only emotional, but that spiritual realm. I do credit like my relationship with God with the pulling ideas, or just having inner inclinations from a very deep place that I can express, sort of like the soul speak, or the language of the soul, sort of communication with the divine. And that was always something that was very kind of pure and innocent to me. So drawing from deep experiences, even if they were just things I was imagining, kind of was a great part of my formation as a composer and a person. So for me, it's that sort of emotional aspect of music, the intangible aspect of it, that of why I'm a composer, just because it feeds my soul, and I feel connected to God that way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Who are some of your favorite composers?
I would say in the realm of film music, I did very early discover Hayao Miyazaki's films, like before they were dubbed in English.
Yeah.
Joe Hisaishi, the composer of many of those films, was I don't know. He influenced me, and maybe not as much of a direct way, like I wanted to totally copy his style or copy his melodies, but the way how expressive he was with music. He took from sort of like, I don't know, post-romantic composers and made it his own in his imaginative, sprightly way. Like whether he was his orchestration was a little bit more complex than your average film score. So Joe Hisaishi that's sort of like he named himself that because he liked Quincy Jones a lot. But he's a great composer, and Danny Elfman is an amazing composer who I was exposed to pretty early as well, because when my brother was getting into films, like Tim Burton films and other sort of early exposure to things that were a little bit off the beaten path, even though they're still in the American to a certain extent. And Danny Elfman's a similar thing, where he's just really fun. He didn't mind breaking rules because he also was sort of self-taught, and he'd already been a rock music star from Bungo Bungo, but what he did to transition to film music was incredible. So those two guys, I think, influenced a lot of people like me who wanted to become film composers later. And then I started watching a lot more independent foreign cinema, and was exposed to there's sort of film artists that are still famous, in films like Nina Rota for Fellini's films, and just a lot of classic. I also like the golden age of Hollywood. There's so many composers out there, but I really like that almost big band, beautifully orchestrated, beautiful strings, classic Hollywood. I wouldn't say my style reflects that, but sometimes I'm more inspired by the moods and feelings they generate, even if it's not in my exact realm. But yeah, that said, I don't have a ton of influences I can point to, just because I don't go deep with one composer necessarily. I sort of base it more on the projects they do, and as a filmmaker, not just a composer, I sometimes am even more inspired by films that have little to no music, if it creates the right mood and sparks the imagination.
Oh yeah,
so
yeah. No, go ahead.
That's about it. I mean, Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is, I guess I never obsessively listened to music. Actually, to mention it right now, throughout high school, I didn't listen to any music at all because I had this like idea that I wanted to find something totally, truly original, and even if it was within like that realm of music that sounds like film music. And I slowly started listening to music after that, but I was very staunch, like almost religious about it, like about not listening to anything at all. But I think it helped at least to clarify what my natural inclinations and style is, even if I was unconsciously pulling things. It was just sort of that rugged individualist, thing, artist, that sort of mythology of the American artist or any artist that is playing to the beat of their own drum or yeah.
No, I definitely understand what you're saying in all of those respects because I mean, and I almost went the opposite direction where it's like once I fell into film music, I fell hard, and it's like I started like composers, John Williams, James Horner, Hans Zimmer, all of those composers. Like Hans Zimmer is my favorite film composer of all time. I love I love the soundscapes that he does. I love the way he uses synthesizers along with orchestral instruments. I just the atmospheres and the moods that he's able to bring forth in his scores has just always been inspiration for me. And so I almost went in the opposite direction where it's like especially when I first started composing, and it's like this is like 20 years since I started composing this year, and I'm going back and listening to some of my earlier pieces, and it's like so much of it is inspired by music I was listening to at the time. And it wasn't that I was trying to actively it wasn't necessarily that I was trying to actively copy it, but it was like I was trying to I don't necessarily have perfect pitch. I didn't necessarily I wasn't self-taught necessarily as a musician. So I sort of it was a process, but I knew I wanted to compose. I knew I had something in me that I had to release in that respect. And it's like there was something musically that that just performing music just wasn't enough for me. And so yeah, and you mentioned Miyazaki's composer. Absolutely, like Princess Mononoke and Spirited Away are two of my favorite scores from those respective years. I mean, they're just so beautiful. So yeah, it's and that's part of the reason why I was so interested in talking to you because of the fact that it's like I know musicians, I know composers, but it's like being able to have that conversation about like share about influences and stuff like that. Now, as I went along, I did start to I really did develop my own personal my own sound, my own distinct aesthetics as a composer, and I was less inspired by specific pieces or scores I was listening to, and more just, well, okay, this is like several years ago, like 14, 15 years ago, I did an album of music inspired by Ennio Morricone's spaghetti westerns. And it doesn't sound like Morricone. It doesn't have that distinct, amazing sound of like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly or Once Upon a Time in the West or anything like that. But what his scores did, they pointed the path as far as like, okay, what type of instrument should I be looking at to tell my own story here? And that is one of the things that's one of the things that as I have gotten older, it's more been, so what do I want to say and how do I want to say it? And what can I, even if I'm not without, mimicking what these composers did, how can I evoke that same feeling that they did?
Sure.
And that was
I think I think that was a good route for you, and probably more. That probably makes more sense in the long run. And I guess now that I'm a little older, I realize that the method I used that was so rigid probably helped me get to what my sound was more quickly, but at the same time stunted my growth in other areas to get to where I am now. Like I had to make probably a lot more mistakes in learning about orchestration and learning about harmonic structure and certain aspects of rhythm, because in a way, like secluding myself and trying to put myself in a vacuum caused difficulties, but initially did help me just in my journey. I don't think most people would probably take that journey of trying to seclude themselves that way, but that totally makes sense. And that's where having the formal training, I think, could, especially now, could have helped me develop certain aspects of my music more quickly.
Yeah.
But that said, I don't regret it. And it was just what I felt at the time was so. What Eric and I were both going through, trying to create music and having these visions and ideas of things that were new and that were not of the mainstream, but could possibly be just different ways to tell stories, because he comes from experimental animation. And I met a lot of the people at CalArts that he was studying with, and I got exposed to a lot of alternative cinema very early. A lot of experimental animation, but also live action films. And I saw some crazy stuff kind of early, like Tetsuo the Iron Man when I was like 14, just crazy Japanese film. So I think my brother helped me get off the mainstream way. I think I would have been a little bit even more populist in my sensibilities as a composer until I watched some of these movies and thought of creating my own sounds with synth, and not heavy programming, but trying to think of new ways to tell stories. And it's funny because I guess I compartmentalize it, but my film scores and symphonic music is more populist and very easier to listen to, has a broad appeal in a certain way from what I understand. But then the other aspect of the music I've done for art installations and art shows is totally experimental and very sound design driven, and kind of it's strange the way my mind works when I'm composing that kind of music. It's definitely not the same methodology. It's just dealing with the sounds themselves in strange shapes and strange forms that are not structured and become structured later on, but dealing with a lot of happy accidents with sound effects and instruments. And I kind of have kept those separate. My experimental music, which I have plenty of that, in my symphonic music. But yeah, that said, it was nice to have an older brother who was a filmmaker. That helps a lot with doing music for all of his early films and forming my own, mini canon of film music at this point.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, it's like I think ultimately there's no one right way to get into composing. I mean, everybody's journey is different. I mean, the journey that you went on is just one of those. It was your journey, and I think it definitely, it worked. Ultimately, it worked for you, because I feel like your music is just as important to the success of Imagination and Glitch in the Grid and Apocalypsis as the images that Eric's putting on screen. And that's the best possible scenario for film music. And I mean, you brought up Danny Elfman earlier, where it's like he was a rock artist, and it's like Oingo Boingo. If you've listened to Oingo Boingo, you know that it is not like traditional rock, but the way he came to film music is completely it completely defines his sensibilities and his sound, and you've seen that evolve over the years. And so I think, just because one person comes from a more traditional background of studying music versus one that's self-taught and just sort of, and sort of, there's no one right way to do it. And I mean, I feel like there's value in any way you do it. I mean, there really is.
Sure, yeah. And film music is something that is it's a relationship between the composer and the director, primarily that symbiotic relationship, and not something you necessarily do really study for, because it can mean one note correctly placed, or one instrument correctly placed in a scene, and it's not the merits of the music itself, it's how it marries to the visual, and also if you can make it memorable at the same time, you've done a great service to the film. So part of that self-education was doing dozens of short films with Eric, and then finally starting the feature-length films. And I've contributed music to other short films from other filmmakers, and had beginnings of opportunities for feature-length films, but there was always something, like the film didn't get made, or other things that happened. That said, it's still a pleasure to do film music, but I've found that kind of, I don't know if this is switching gears, but the symphonic music I've created, well, actually, I wrote a symphony that was recorded in 2015. That began just because I wanted to create music that stood on its own legs, that wasn't just attached to a film, wasn't just 3-4 minute segments, but something that told its own story and didn't need a visual component. I think that was just the restlessness of not feeling like I'm a composer, but am I really composing music? Like, can I create something that doesn't have to end after a cue? And that began another aspect of my life, to where I'm actually wrote my first opera, and I'm still in the second draft of some of the scenes now. But that's another subject, obviously. But that my journey as a composer has actually started to move away from film. Not that I wouldn't work on a film, but into theater. I did music for a play, and it's just funny how it's naturally evolving in a different direction. Possibly that could help.
Where can people find your music?
Well, it is all on Spotify and iTunes and platforms like that. The opera is still. I had a sort of lab concert, which is on segments are on Vimeo, but prior to that, everything else is just under my name, Jeffrey Leiser, including The Summit, my symphony, which was recorded in 2015, came out on a small UK label, but that's you can find that through just the rest of the score music that's out there.
Okay.
Under my name, yeah.
All right. Well, let's go to your featured collaborations with your brother Eric, with Imagination, Glitch in the Grid, and Apocalypsis. When you guys start to think about a project, how quickly are you starting to think about the music that you want to do for that film?
For Imagination, it was especially unique because I started creating music at the inception of the idea that Eric had, and I created about 5 times more music than is even in the film. That was a special circumstance that we never had that much time, or I never had that much time of creating music inspired to the project during the process as Imagination. And critics have probably praised that score of mine over the others. I mean, I thankfully have gotten positive reviews for the films, for the scores I've done for all of our films. But I can only really credit that to the fact that I was able to have a ton of space to develop a lot of different cues and a lot of different sounds that I could run by Eric throughout the process, get his ideas, and then create more music, and then just edit and edit and edit, to where I honestly had probably 40, 50 cues to pull from for the actual feature film.
Yeah.
And I was able to form another score just off of that material. And I think that's why I'm personally probably most proud of that score, because it was so eclectic, but the film was eclectic, so it sort of just made sense to form the music that way. And on the other films, like Glitch in the Grid, it was half and half. Probably half the music was created, at least half the music during production, and half in post. And then Apocalypsis was probably more like 60-70% of the music was done after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
So it's progressively been more traditional, but never 100% where people hire a composer at the end of the process.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can bring in a composer as early as possible,
mm-hmm.
it can be really beneficial for a film. Some people, I suppose, could work off their first instinct for a scene, and that could work. But if it doesn't work, then you're stuck with a really tight deadline. And good things can happen in deadlines, but you could still miss the boat on truly processing the film on mental levels and emotional levels, and really wrap your head around what's going on with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and
so yeah.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, for Imagination, it was the first time I wrote for real instruments.
Mm-hmm.
A little over half of the film is synths and virtual instruments, but a fair amount of it is either a hybrid or outright real actual instruments. So I wrote, I was using musicians at CalArts, some string players and wind players, mm-hmm. and that really elevated the score, as well as the fact that the two main leads in the film, Nikki and Jessie, the twin girls,
mm-hmm.
Sing the song that's in the film, the Fawn song, Albino Fawn. And that was really a special experience to get them in the studio and record that, because they were incredible. Their voices already were synced almost perfectly. They learned that piece on the spot without even looking at a score. They just had the lyrics, and I hummed the melody. They just perfectly got it. So it was more than just a film score. It was since I was part of the whole process of the film.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, and the thing is, it's like I and I think part of and it doesn't necessarily surprise me that more of, especially when you're looking at those three films, more and more of the music has been done in post, because I think part of one of the things that's kind of interesting about that trilogy of films is that it's gotten each progressive film has become more and more of a conventional narrative. Imagination is more like a tone poem. It really does come off more as a tone poem than a straight line narrative, and that's one of the things that definitely had an impact on me when I watched it in 2007, and so it doesn't surprise me at all when you say that so much that gradually it's gotten more and more in post production as far as the music goes, because I mean, well, the narrative process of the film has gotten more and more closer to traditional narrative, but the music always does play a fascinating part in each of those films, I think, and getting you into the emotional headspace that those films are putting you in. And I think that's one of the things that's been so impactful for me, having watched all three of the films, and actually having watched them twice now, because I watched them so Eric and I could talk about them last week, and it's just one of those things where the music is such a big part of that, and it's because of the fact that it really it goes hand in hand with the experimental nature of the images, and that's one of the things that I really am captivated by when it comes to watching those films.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm glad that experience, as you know, as a composer, when you're writing music, you want people to share your experience you've had, and everyone wants to be known and understood, including artistically, even if they say they don't, and it's impactful to hear that, because the films, it was tough to gauge the scope and of how far they got, and as we realized throughout the years that especially Imagination got way further than we thought. Not necessarily how much money it made, but our distributor Vanguard, who distributed every film except Apocalypsis, which is an indie can, they were able to really reach the video market before everything went online.
Yeah.
And we had certain really special experiences. For example, up in Northern California, we're from Santa Rosa, and it was somewhere in the Sonoma area. We went to a small video store, and someone had made a display of imagination. They did like printed things and like made a cardboard structure for the film just as a fan of the film. And so we had no idea. We walked into the video store and saw this display, and it was more incredible than having it a million views on YouTube nowadays. Like that physical thing,
Yeah.
that real experience of seeing that it really touched someone, as well as multiple. See, Eric, I think especially, was hoping that the portrayal of autism was. He did a lot of research and he was trying to be very sensitive with that, especially because there's also the girls having these visions and imaginative element. We got multiple emails from mothers of autistic children saying, "Thank you so much for making this. I totally got it. I took this one time in Portland where the film was playing in one of the theatrical screenings. We spoke to a woman who had brought her autistic child and had a conversation about that. So to connect on that level was, I think, very impactful for us. And as well as the strange fact, this was a lot later, probably more like 4 or 5 years ago, that a friend of mine was visiting Cambodia, and apparently the film was widely distributed illegally, bootlegs, and there was a mass production all over, like it looked like it was all over Southeast Asia, regarding how like beautifully done the materials were. Like this wasn't just like printed from the end; it was like a semi-holographic cover, beautiful artwork. They did a whole new DVD menu, and it looked very mass-produced. And even though, again, it's not that we saw the money, but that the film was dubbed into like 4 or 5 languages, including Mandarin, and it's kind of incredible that it was able to have a life of its own. This micro-budget indie film. So I kind of just tell that whole story to illustrate the point that when you have these personal connections with real people, it makes you feel understood, and makes you feel like what you're doing is actually having some important aspect on someone's lives. Because I know my life has been changed by amazing art that I've experienced or heard, and it's helped me have hope for my own projects. So that's a long-winded
yeah.
besides.
But I mean, the fact of the matter is that's one of the things that I like about doing interviews with filmmakers, and the fact that it's like I can, I'll hear a story like that, and it resonates with me, and it resonates with me because of the fact that it's like that's one of the most rewarding things about creating art or creating anything really, and that's just the personal connection that you might get with another individual because of that thing that you did. And
definitely.
And hearing that type of story, and that's a fascinating story. And it's like that when I first watched Imagination, and the couple of years after that, it's like I didn't realize just how expansive the world of sort of micro indie film was.
Right.
And just being able to experience films like the ones that you and Eric made and other filmmakers have made that who have sent me those, it's like it gives me such a larger picture of not just the world in general, but the world of film. And there's so much more going on in film that the mass audience just is not aware of. And it's really unfortunate, but at the same time, it's like it makes it more worthwhile to be able to see movies like Imagination and Glitch in the Grid and Apocalypsis, where there is something deeply personal there. and that's something you're not necessarily going to get at a multiplex. And that's one of the things that's been so rewarding for me over the years in watching films like the ones you and your brother have made.
No, I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, and I can say I've had that experience with filmmakers I've discovered as well, and whether it's domestic or international films that were like really obscure, and you come across it, or even films that aren't necessarily obscure. I worked at I worked at a video store, a mass one like Hollywood Video, but they had a really good foreign like VHS section right before VHS like petered out. And on my own, because I didn't go to film school, I discovered, Ingmar Bergman and Fellini and a lot of those people who are famous. But then I started watching all of their films, like sort of anthology. I think I'm a lot more obsessive about filmmakers than I am about composers, which is strange. Like I have to see all their films. But just to have an experience of discovering something on your own, and because that was still early internet, and I wasn't basing everything off Rotten Tomatoes at that point. I wasn't just basing it off, how broad the film, what film festivals it's been in, but it was a little bit more pure, where I just literally wanted to keep watching those movies, whether they were good or not. I wanted to go backward in time with that filmmaker and have that shared experience almost, where I felt like I knew who they were. And I have to say that I worked at the Criterion Collection for 6 years, and a lot of my job was just watching movies, looking for digital things like that, like a lot of quality control stuff. Watching literally hundreds of films, like in a lot of really obscure films that were only on the Hulu platform before that sort of phased out for Criterion. But there were a lot of films, especially Japanese films, that were never restored and released by the Criterion Collection, but were just thrown online on their Hulu channel. And that had a profound formation in me as well. Like whether it was some obscure Czech film or Japanese film or something like that, gave me a broader view of the world, and kind of hopefully instill more empathy for other cultures than I feel like I had empathy for other cultures. But when you really are going through the world, seeing these stories told, large and small, I think it can increase your empathy for other people, socioeconomic status, obviously culturally and racially, like to see how other people experience life and look at life. And I think that's where films can be so vitally powerful. Like, as you said, beyond the multiplex. And I watch, those films as well, and I appreciate those films. There's a lot of craftsmanship in them. But yeah, when you come across something, you're really seeing through someone else's eyes, and it can, if you allow yourself, that can really make you a broader scope person. So I hope that has had that effect on me through, especially at Criterion, where I literally watch films for my job, which was kind of a dream job.
Yeah, I mean, when Eric told me that you had worked at Criterion, I'm like, oh, I'm jealous of that.
That it was amazing.
Yeah, that would be, like you said, it would be a dream job. But what are some of your, if I mean, we already talked about Danny Elfman, we already talked about Miyazaki's films. What are some of your favorite film soundtracks?
Film soundtracks. You mean individual film soundtracks?
Yeah, individual.
Yeah.
I mean, or like if there's a series or something like that. Yeah, I mean.
Definitely, yeah. Trying to think of specific films. James Horner's score for Legends of the Fall. It's like this lush, beautifully romantic. You could say like maximal Hollywood score, but I find it resonates on a deeper level for me. That film, it's a beautiful melodrama. My brother and I connect with it a lot, and we're almost embarrassed to tell people because it's like this major Brad Pitt vehicle. But if you watch the film, there are a lot of multi-layered things happening. There's a lot of elements of grief and forgiveness, and all the raw emotions of going off to war as a sort of side story. The relationship between the three brothers is sort of, if you have a brother, you really can connect with it on that level. But what James Horner did, especially the aspect of First Nations, Native American, in Montana and Canada, the way he used those instruments and kind of I didn't feel like he appropriated them so much as he amplified the beauty and the mystical quality, because I did some research on the film, and they really did use First Nations actors and paid a lot of respect to them. Ed Zwick, the director, but that film score, which is mostly strings driven, is, I think, it just really moves me on that maximal level of like pure melody repeating over and over again.
Yeah.
And then another one of my favorite films, and I think one of the best film scores, in my opinion, is the minimalist score for Dead Man. It's a guitar solo score throughout the entire film from Neil Young.
Yeah.
And the way he sort of just like uses basic guitar pedals and like echo, just so, another film that has like a mystical quality to it. Jim Jarmusch. That's a wonderful film score.
Yeah.
And I like a lot of playful scores as well. I should remember his name, but the composer for most of Jacques Tati's films, like Playtime, that's actually that film is mostly sound effects driven, which I still consider a film score, even if it's just sound effects, because I am a sound designer as well. So sometimes I really react to the way people do sound design, and I mean, there's so many composers out there that I'll just return to certain films I remember that they did. But I like the way in general that Jim Jarmusch uses music. I really like Ghost Dog, even Ghost Dog, The Way of the Samurai, and I think there's some here's hip hop elements there, which is a genre I respect. I don't listen to it as much in my personal time, but I like when things sort of break the mold. Like, I think Johnny Greenwood is breaking the mold with what he's drawn from for his P.T. Anderson films. I think he's breaking the mold there. He's doing things that are more experimental. He's creating beautiful textures. So I guess that's more of a contemporary. Again, P.T. Anderson uses like John Bryan, great composers that have a real knack for the offbeat, off-kilter film scores. So those are some examples of scores that I and many others, I think, respect a lot.
Oh yeah, and I mean it's you first mentioned James Horner, and I mean he's one of my favorite composers. Braveheart is one of the music scores that really inspired me to want to compose. And he's a composer that he didn't, because of the fact that he used similar motifs, he used similar sounds and instruments throughout score after score after score, he was almost undervalued while he was still alive. And especially after Titanic. And the fact of the matter is, though, it's like you listen to something like Legends of the Fall or Braveheart, or I just rewatched Willow for the first time in years, and it's like,
oh yeah, God, I love that score.
His score for that is phenomenal, and then the music they did for Wrath of Khan and Search for Spock, it's like there's such a rich tapestry of sound that he used in his scores. And I mean, I it's been years since I've watched Legends of the Fall, but I mean his score for that is just it's thrilling as somebody who loves film music, and you see just how effective it can be in film music. And Dead Man, Neil Young's score for Dead Man is tremendous. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but it's like a friend of mine is a big Jarmusch fan, and he loves that score as well. And so I had to burn a copy of that for myself, just because of the fact that that score is so fascinating. I am a Neil Young fan, but do you have a website that people can go to?
Sorry, I had a cough there. My website is it's actually my full name .com. I do have a page on albanophon.com, but my personal website is it's jeffreyrolandleiser.com, and I have bits of my opera on there from the recent Lab conference concerts, right? And also I have snippets of my film scores, and I have a link to where you can buy the symphony, other ephemera, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So yeah.
All right. And we mentioned it, or you mentioned it earlier. Your music is also on Spotify and iTunes and sites like that as well.
Yeah, I kind of put everything on to Spotify, and in 2010, I put all of my early music up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually have a few hundred cues on there, or thereabouts. Which I like that. I approach it this way. I see them as memories, sort of time capsules.
Mm-hmm.
And when I go back in time, I do see that there's elements that are more archaic, but I don't devalue them in my development.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of like revisiting them just to listen and think about what was I doing at that time, what was I exploring. And so the decision to put it on there was just to have the sort of library where if people were interested. I don't expect people to listen to all the music. They can chance upon it. Maybe the title comes up somewhere, and they're like, "What is this? It sounds different." To not undervalue those early works, which I know a lot of composers just want to like sweep those under the rug and just say, "Oh no, my latest thing's this." And I agree. I feel like my latest thing is always the best thing, but at the same time, I'm not quite sure that's always the case.
Yeah.
So I try to value my early music in a way that's hopefully not like I'm just being absorbed in myself, but more of that's what I was creating at the time. And if people want to sort of take the journey, that they can listen to this music. And Spotify, it's an easy target because, I mean, I'm not really getting much money from it, but I like the fact that anyone can stream it all and not have to worry about, paying for every single thing that they listen to.
Right.
And if they want to go to iTunes and download an album, that's great. But I know the way that streaming music has headed, and it would be nice if someone just puts the Spotify channel on and has it in the background, even when they hear something, they're like, "Oh wait, I'm gonna check that out," or skip 30 songs until you find something you like. But yeah, I had mixed feelings about putting that up, and another thing was just to have it circulating. You never know who it's going to reach, and I don't have a lot of followers on Spotify because I was so focused in the iTunes realm for most of my life. But I'm trying to catch up with the times and probably be promoting Spotify more going forward. But yeah, it's sort of just my whole catalog on there.
Okay. Other than the opera, do you have anything else going on as far as creatively?
Well, I had a project that it's a really unique project because it's a private composition I did for an art collector who has an installation in his house, and I just finished this like 16.5-minute piece for his installation. But it's a private piece, and I'm only bringing that up because I thought it was so unique, and I'm wondering if music will start taking this direction where people commission private works of music for their home, and like as if they're paintings.
Yeah.
And I also thought about the fact that like a lot of people were like court musicians or composers in their day, at least in the classical realm, and they were creating music that was commissioned for events or like kings or like certain festivals. And I'm not saying that I'm going to keep going that direction because these opportunities are very few and far between. But that was my latest project, and I found it was kind of interesting to say I want to create music that's like as beautiful as I can possibly make it, knowing that it's going to be listened to by anyone else. And I think that helped confront my ego a little bit, which is like, oh, well, how much should I really put into this if no one's going to hear it? And kind of setting that aside and saying, well, would I just create a beautiful piece of music just because I enjoy it? And I do still. That's still the impetus for why I create music. Is I do it because it speaks to my soul and it helps me emotionally. It helps me get through life. And as much as I love to share it, because that is usually the end game, this project kind of helped on a personal level, to just go back to the basics of why do I even create music, and
I want to like share this generously with like even if it's one person or 10 people or 100, that I'll try to bring my best to whatever project I do. So there's that. I did music for I mentioned earlier a play for a Macbeth play, and that score isn't out yet, but I do have all the music from that. I'm not sure what to do with it yet, but that will probably be dropping somewhere in the next year. But outside of that, I'm just continuing to work on the second draft revisions of my opera. It's called Far Travelers, and I wrote the libretti as well, storyline. And I'm working with my friend Andre Soto on that, who's an orchestrator, and arranger, and composer himself. And basically, we have a draft of the whole opera, but we're working on the scenes and kind of taking them apart. And Andres is doing some great things with orchestration, and we hope to have the opera completely finished by the end of the year, possibly the next year by early spring at the very latest. And we'll be looking to pitch that to opera companies formally. So that's the next thing to look out for, is basically the opera on stage, not just a recording, but an actual live performance.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Well, Jeffrey, thank you very much for joining me today. I really enjoyed talking to you as one composer to another, and as somebody who really enjoys your music for film. It's rare to get a chance to talk to a film composer, and it's been great to get to know you, get to understand your background, your process, and see what exactly goes into the music that I definitely found so striking in Imagination, The Glitch in the Grid, and Apocalypsis. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Likewise, it was great talking to you, and I really appreciate your comments and what you're doing. And I just appreciate the opportunity to even talk about creative output.
Yeah. I'd like to thank Jeffrey for joining me on the podcast. I'm glad we were able to get together and talk. It's rare to really get a chance to talk about music with a composer and a film composer, and that's going to be a lot of fun. Coming up, there are going to be more podcasts, more filmmaker interviews, more discussions on filmmakers. On Patreon, you're going to get some more about the book. You're also going to get another commentary that has never been heard outside of my ears and when we recorded it, and much more. And I'm also planning on doing some special stuff from Dragon Con for patrons. So that is patreon.com/SonicCinema. For now, though, my name is Brian Scuttle, and thank you for joining me at the Sonic Cinema podcast. Have a good day.